This is Grant Troop, Mid-Atlantic reporter, correspondent for Ag Reports Network. We're out here on the week of the 21st of October, looking at some of the corn that hasn't been harvested yet here in the Mid-Atlantic region. We're at Perryville today, and just taking a look at some of the years and some of the conditions in this field. We've had a couple good days of drying weather after a weekend that gave 3.5, 4 days of rain, where we had almost 3.5 inches of rain in this particular location. And the ground is wet, although this long-term no-till field, I believe, would support some traffic if we need to get in here and harvest. Harvest in this general area is running about 2 weeks behind normal schedule. Some areas even a bit later than that. And it's been difficult to get grain dried down to a moisture level where guys are comfortable to want to take it in. And this field shows some pretty nice years in a no-till field. This is also one of the fields that got cover crop rye seeded from the air blast seeder back on Labor Day weekend over that time period. And I'll try to scan down into the field here and see if you can see some of that rye growing between the rows. I'll move in a little closer, and you can see what kind of a stand of rye we have in the field. It is somewhat spotty. There are areas that we really have a nice stand, and there are other areas that the rye come up a little bit on the spotty side and thin side. We should have plenty of residue to hold the soil and keep it covered for this winter, but we would like to have had a little bit heavier rye cover crop in this particular zone. Although, as Ken Scott reminded me today, we've always had trouble getting cover crops to grow on this particular farm, no matter how we planted it, so maybe this is as good as it gets. Conditions are drying now. We're looking for a couple more days of dry weather before we go back to some rain. Another spell of rain predicted in here over the weekend, although they're saying, the weatherologists are saying, not near as much rain with this event as we had last week. So hopefully till next week, which would be that last week of October, we can be in here with the combines rolling and get this corn off and try to get her out of the field here before we have any kind of substantial field loss. Corn is standing well. The only place we have any down corn seems to be basically where the air blast seeder had to drive through, and he didn't knock much down. Look down the rows and it's standing pretty well, so we're pretty happy with what we got here. We'll fill you in on another farm here in just a few minutes. We're here the third week of October, checking out some of the cover crop rye that was planted with an air blast seeder at the Newstead farm at Perryville, Maryland. And you can see again between the rows there's some rye growing from the broadcast seeding on the surface. And one of the things we have noticed in these fields that have been in no-till for a number of years now, and the rotation on most of the fields is 2 years of corn with the residue left both years, and cover crops planted after each crop, drilled into the residue, and then soybeans would be your third year in that rotation, and then a cover crop drilled in right after the soybeans come off. And the cover crop usually allowed to get almost waist high in the spring till it's terminated. And when we look down close between the rows and between these rye plants, there is next to no residue. So this underground livestock we've got going here, the earthworms and other things that are active, have consumed it all. And the old statement we heard years ago, or farmers said, well, you can no-till for a few years, but eventually you're going to have to plow to get rid of all that residue. Didn't happen. Nature took care of it, incorporated it into the soil, and it's gone. I mean, the field bottom is really clearer of residue than I really wanted to see it, but we've put about as much as we can possibly put on there with growing crops and cover crops, that you can't do much more to have much more residue, and it's just still barely keeping up. So an interesting thing that happens in these long-term no-till fields, soil biology works like it's supposed to, and it digests those materials pretty quickly. And that's sort of how it works in a forest. You never see the leaves getting to the tops of the trees. The soil and the active biology on the soil surface keeps digesting and decaying those leaves down to eventually the humus. And that's sort of the same principle we're working with here in this no-till. I happened to notice this evening from Lititz, Pennsylvania, some very different and unusual cloud formations for Pennsylvania. And I'd have to look in my cloud directory, figure out what kind of clouds these are. They're pretty high. They got a little cumulus characteristic and also a little bit of cirrus characteristic, and very stretched out patterns compared to what we're normally seeing in this state. So just some very different cloud formations that we don't normally see in Pennsylvania. Some of the rest of the people around the country may be a little bit more familiar with these kind of cloud formations, but here in PA they are quite different. And I thought I ought to get a picture of that because the weather's quite different, quite warm today. It's Wednesday, October 22nd, and some of our guys are back in the field harvesting. See here in the background a field of soybeans that is harvested, and guys are trying to get their beans off because the field loss on those can run pretty high pretty quick, and so we get the beans off and we're able to get back to corn and not have quite as much field loss on the corn, even if we are a little bit later. Corn is generally quite wet. We're running probably 6 to 8 percentage points higher this time of year than last year in percentage moisture, and that's caused some stress for the farmers. You know, you've got that tension of waiting to get the moisture down. The weather's just not cooperating. We keep getting rain and showers so that the corn is not drying down very quickly, and it's kind of difficult situation to be in. As we look across the back of the Binkley and Hurst lot here, with a few of the rigs that are setting on the lot here. For the Ag Reports Network, this is the Mid-Atlantic correspondent, H. Grant Troop, and we'll try to get you a little bit more footage as we get through the harvest season.